What is the relationship between the International Monetary Fund, IMF, central banks, and Ripple? I have a strong feeling that these three entities are deeply involved, based on my analysis of many remarks by Christine Lagarde, the head of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, as well as watching Ripple hosting meetings and presenting at gatherings for central banks. Christine Lagarde, I believe, has disclosed information about the IMF's vision for the future financial system. I feel there will be significant changes in the near future. In short, the IMF believes that in the future, they will play a larger role, as will the world's central banks. The first meeting discussed in this article was Bretton Woods at 75, which commemorated the IMF and World Bank's 75th anniversary. The panel discussion titled Rethinking International Cooperation provided us with some intriguing insights. The discussion focused on how the US dollar's role as the world's reserve currency is less than ideal for the global financial system. The second message, which was repeated throughout the panel discussion, was that there is a need for a more balanced power structure among the major currencies, the US dollar, the euro, and the renminbi, which would effectively reduce the USD's worldwide significance. The optimal arrangement would be a multipolar interaction between the major currencies. The panel included representatives from the European Union and China, who represented the euro and the renminbi, respectively. A lady who spoke about the importance of financial inclusion in Mexico was the odd one out at the panel discussion. The mention of the Triffin Plan and the Keynes Plan piqued my interest. The following is an excerpt from the conference. By adapting and modernizing some ancient notions of what's known as the Keynes Plan and the Triffin Plan, we may conceive a new, expanded role for the IMF. You'll find something intriguing if you look up the definitions of the Keynes Plan and the Triffin Plan. The Keynes strategy is as follows: an alternative set of suggestions for international monetary institutions offered by John Maynard Keynes, 1883 to 1946, at the Bretton Woods Post-War Monetary Arrangements Conference in 1944. The establishment of an international monetary unit, the Bancor, was part of Keynes' plan. The initiative was rejected, and the International Monetary Fund was established instead, based on U.S. proposals. The Keynes plan included a supranational currency at the time. Now, there's something else that drew my notice as well. In an official document on digital fiat currencies, XRP was labeled as a supranational currency, DFC. This is shown on the second page of the document, where XRP is explained as follows. It also shows that Bitcoin is classified as a cryptocurrency. Particular labels are crucial, especially in formal papers. So, what is the Keynes-Triffin strategy? A drastic solution would be to establish a new international organization, an international central bank, to which all countries' foreign exchange reserves would be handed over. The Keynes-Triffin International Liquidity Plan is what it sounds like. The refusal of countries to relinquish sovereignty over reserves would be the main impediment to its adoption. However, it can be viewed as a proposal to get future conversations started. You may picture the IMF operating a global reserve facility at the IMF, presumably based on existing drawing rights, to centralize reserve sharing arrangements. The IMF could also try to multilateralize the decentralized parts of the bilateral swap lines network, which are largely discretionary, by acting as a central counterparty clearinghouse for these bilateral swap lines and absorbing some of the counterparty risk, or by offering its own short-term swap facility. It can be seen in their perception of the IMF as a counterparty to central banks. The IMF, it was said, could essentially cut sovereign risk between central banks by absorbing the risk instead of central banks, therefore lowering the risk for central banks as a whole. It was presented in the following manner: the IMF could show up as an intermediary between the Federal Reserve, since we're talking about dollars, and the other central banks, and why I say it's an intermediary is because many countries, such as India or Brazil, would benefit from swap lines but are unable to do so because the Federal Reserve is concerned about sovereign risk, while the IMF could appear in the middle, take the sovereign risk back because swap line with its SDR, say, with the dollar, and then give a Swiss. The above illustration depicts today's inefficient swap line relationship. It's worth noting that by using XRP as a settlement method between central banks, these intricate bilateral interactions with swap lines would be unnecessary. The panel discussion provided a much clearer picture of how the IMF sees themselves expanding their position. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, would be in the middle, absorbing the sovereign risk of payments between central banks. I'll leave you with a final comment from Christine Lagarde's panel discussion that should pique your interest. So, what you're saying is that we should go back to the drawing board because we did actually explore for a period of time a combination of a liquidity line financial product that we could put together and that addresses the issues of emerging market economies that are in some ways left out of the game, and will also, considering much to central banks' displeasure, to put it that way. How we could do exactly that, which is to sort of act as the platform that would there were several very high-level financial representatives present at the recent Swiss National Bank conference. Many central bank representatives attended, as well as the head of the Bank for International Settlements. And, of course, there's the International Monetary Fund. Christine Lagarde was in attendance, and Brad Garlinghouse was the lone private sector representative at the front table. Brad offered the entire group a demonstration of Ripple's technology. Ripple's Sagar Sarbhai claimed during the 2018 Bangkok FinTech Fair that the company works closely with 40 to 50 central banks. At the time, this was a bold assertion because just a few central banks were known to be working with Ripple. Ripple has previously been described as a disruptor by Christine Lagarde. Why would she single Ripple out like this? So, what's the deal with Ripple, the IMF, and all of these central banks? The IMF, in my opinion, has recognized the potential of Ripple's technology and is actively attempting to persuade central banks and other financial institutions to use it. I also believe that the IMF recognizes that the role they envision for the IMF might be realized by leveraging Ripple's technology. This makes sense to me only if they're leveraging XRP in some way. Otherwise, why would the IMF follow Ripple around everywhere? Ripple is merely a payment processor. The IMF's principal responsibility is to maintain stable currency exchange rates. For settlement, they might link the SDR to XRP. Is it possible that XRP will be the Bancor? I also think it's appropriate that the IMF sees central banks as becoming far more important to the financial system in the future. This is most likely why Ripple holds so many meetings with central banks. They're attempting to establish a link with the IMF at the heart of all central banks, where all payments are channeled through the central banks, presumably for security and transaction tracking. I believe a new financial system is being deployed, with the IMF, central banks, and Ripple's XRP technology at its core.